All righty, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Russ Summers. I will be your moderator today. Joining me, we have Noah Zandan, CEO and founder of Quantified. And we also have AJ Bruno, CEO and founder of QuotaPath. Welcome both.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Excellent. So first off, just to intro you both, Noah, as I mentioned, is founder of Quantified. He has a long background in behavioral science. He started as a quant on Wall Street, hence his obsession with quantifying everything, including sales communication. So that puts him in a very good position to have a perspective on these issues. And then AJ, I've just got to say, it's damn good to have you here. AJ and I worked together at a company called TrendKite years back. And in addition to that company having been phenomenally successful and a lot of fun, and QuotaPath, I hear, is similarly successful and a lot of fun, one of the things I enjoyed most is that you were such a gifted sales coach there. And I vividly remember sitting at my desk, seeing you walk back and forth with people, sparring out deals and just going through, okay, what do we need to do? Let's talk it through. Let's role play this, etc. And just that memory always stuck with me from those days. So super delighted to have you here, because I don't know anybody that is more of an authority on sales coaching in my mind than you, AJ.
Well, thanks, Russ. First off, you used the word sparring, which I absolutely love. And we'll talk about that, because that was a word that I took from my first job and role as a sales leader, an individual seller too. And then carried that on, and still something that I hold true today. And secondly, I have none of the credentials that Noah has. So I appreciate it. Don't have a quant degree, that's for sure. So I'm really excited to be here and kind of talk a little bit of the art and science and the role-playing game that we play as sales leaders.
Awesome. So I'm just sort of curious, and I'm actually going to start someplace different than we talked about, because you said something really interesting. Why the word sparring, AJ? Why not coaching? Why not practice? Why do you like that word?
I mean, the truth of the matter is, back in the day, circa 2008, so you can imagine 2008, and the movie Boiler Room had just hit. Glenn Ross was like all the rage and playing the Alec Baldwin scene that we all know and love, and it feels a little old then or now, but at that time it was something that, like, your sales wasn't looked at as this glamorous role or position that you would take it. In fact, when I left college and told my parents that I was taking a sales role, they were like, what? Are you kidding me? You just went to Penn State, you got this economics degree, you have 2 job offers in DC for a consulting firm, and you're going to take a sales role at a technology company? Are you kidding me? And I really knew at that time that I wanted to own a business, and I thought there's no better way for me to get my true degree in owning a company than understanding the top line and bottom line of a business, and thought sales was the best profession to do that. Turned out to be true. But that the sparring piece that you talk about early those days, so I was in a room with 12 other sellers, worked for this company, Meltwater. There were 1,000 employees, 800 were sales reps, 800 of the 1,000. No marketing. There's no CMO. In fact, when I left the company 5 years later, they had just hired their 4th CMO, each lasted 6 months, because it was a very sales-led organization. But in my office, when I ran the office, we had these 2 little wooden pirate swords that we'd have. And we kind of would just on calls, just kind of slash them and walk around. Well, when we got off calls, we were talking about deals that we were going to try to close, and we'd just be hitting these swords together. And so we naturally just had this term that came up that we were sparring things out at that time. And I carried that, and maybe you all have heard this at other companies, but I carried that to TrendKite when I ran and built that sales team, and just sparring just stuck, even though the plastic swords or the wooden swords did not. And that's where that term derived from.
Cool. I love it, because it implies some level of conflict, some level of drama, some level of resolution, as opposed to just sort of rote practice. So I love it. But I want to get back to the actual, sort of topics at hand. Curious to know, for both of you, what role has coaching played in the success of your companies to date? You've both worked with many companies, done a lot of things. How has coaching been important or not? AJ, why don't you go first?
Well, I would think it's a fundamental part of the job for any leader. It doesn't matter if it's sales or not. Coaching is a really important part and implies that you're working with a team that has learning and growing and that they're curious. So if you take that skill set, that basic skill set, then the way to cultivate that would be through coaching. As it relates to sales, it's been a really big part of my career because I've tended to err on cultivating younger and experienced talent and folks that aren't familiar with not just sales, but business communication. How do you write an email? Should I end it with regards or best regards? Like those are questions that I got very early on. And that level of cultivation and mentoring, how it presents itself is just consistent coaching. So every single day as a sales leader, that's all I spent my time doing. In fact, that's what I enjoyed doing because it, as you said, Russ, at the beginning of this, it like allowed me to like be on my feet, moving from conversation to conversation and really listening intently to not just what the rep was saying, but the customer. And like, that's how I got my own experience. And like, I felt like I was getting coached just through that as well, of just that active listening and understanding that an inexperienced rep is going to be thinking about the next things to say because they just don't have the blueprint, versus what I was trying to really do was emulate so that when they got off a call, it was that sparring sessions where it's like, okay, what did you hear? And what did you like think about? And at that time, this was back in 2008, we didn't have any of the recording tools that are available. And there's a suite of them. We all know the gong and the chorus, and there's just a ton of them. Everything records now. We had an RCA recorder that I got from Radio Shack, and then I would plug in, and I plugged it in and recorded it. And then I would take it out and we'd sit there. I put the recorder on the desk, and the best way I found coaching was that the rep would listen to the call and I'd be like, hey, you're the sales manager of this conversation you're hearing right now. Like, what are you, if you're coaching that person, what are you hearing? What are you like, we're playing back the tape. Like, what are you hearing that is different from when you were on the call? And that would bring out a lot of things and create this like self-fulfilling loop on an individual coaching, as well as me helping to reinforce and validate what they were saying.
I love that. Noah, how about you? You've in, whether at building Quantified or in earlier companies, how has coaching impacted sort of your business results?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's impacted my life, Russ. I mean, I grew up, I was a swimmer, right? So I swam competitively, pretty seriously from the ages of 8 all the way through 4 years of college. And not surprisingly, to be a good swimmer, you need a good coach. And so, swimming is a very training intensive sport, coaching technique intensive sport. And so, I was fortunate to be coached by some former Olympians and some phenomenal coaches on the swim teams that I was in. And it taught me a lot about, discipline and performance and feedback and being open to being coached. And, it's something that I've personally tried to take to every role that I've had in an organization. Is I, even as a CEO, I look to a lot of people to be my coach, right? Because I know I can perform better with feedback and guidance than someone who's in my corner. The interesting thing though, now that, I have some years to reflect on my swimming and I'm, not the athlete that I used to be, is you actually think about, I was thinking the other day about like, did I get good coaching? Right? I mean, I got coaching and it certainly became a better swimmer, but like, what were those coaches doing? Right? Like they were leaning on their past experience, typically like their personal experience. And so what was really interesting about swimming, and this has sort of changed in a similar way to AJ, you were talking about how sales has changed. Swimming used to be the harder you train, the better you swim. So the more hours you put in the pool, the better performer you are. And then a few coaches, and specifically this guy out of USC, took a data-driven study to coaching and said, does that formula actually work, right? Is more training better performance, or is there a new approach we can take, right? The obvious analogy here is like a Moneyball-like approach, but like, what should we be coaching on? So, I want to say like 2 answers to your question, Russ. One, coaching is absolutely fundamental to performance. We all need the structure, we need the process, we need the guidance, we need the mentoring. But one of the things to be careful about is sometimes we trust our coach without ever wondering, like, where did this person's expertise come from? And is the coaching I'm getting consistent and informed to make me the best performer that I can be? And so I've just reflected on that as I've thought a lot about the quality of coaching that I've personally gotten and the coaching that I deliver and that we build within our software is how do we, A, do the benefits of coaching and the structure, but B, build intelligence into the coaching so it's not just formulated off of previous opinions and pattern observation.
Yeah, no, I love that you're bringing up this kind of like bigger, bringing sports and life into it, but bringing up this bigger concept around practice as well. And I think we all have like know a lot of the top athletes and their stories. There's a podcast that I've really just love and listen to called Founders. David Senra is the guy who reads every biography of like the greatest entrepreneurs. He has the Steve Jobs and of course the Bill Gates, but more recently I've listened to some of the sports figures. So Tiger Woods, who's a maniac, the guy who was practicing 3 hours a day when he was 3 years old, like a total maniac.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan talks about it intensely about practice. He enjoys practice more than the game. And if we think about our teams and our sales teams, that's like that the role playing coaching opportunity that we have, that's our practice, right? That's what we get to do. And you think about a sales rep's day and how much time they're spending on the phone. We want them to spend 100% of time on the phone, but the reality is they're not. And so what are they doing in between that time? Well, to me, it's like getting ready for the game is a really important part of it. It's a really important part of like how we're coaching and how we're mentoring and advising. So I go back to what Russ says. I just like having your team sit idle doesn't make any sense. So like, how are you preparing them for their conversations and the calls that they're going to have in the near future is a really important aspect of this.
Yeah, AJ, you've been doing sales longer than I have, but when I stepped into the market, I was shocked. I'm like, we expect our reps to be selling 100% of the time. It's great. Let's aim for full productivity, but they don't practice, right? And I'm like, I come from this performance sports background of like, to be a great athlete, you're practicing way more than you're performing. In sales, the ratio is probably what, like 90 to 10%? Like, your 10% would probably be good from like a practice role play perspective. And there's a lot of limitations that we can talk about with managers' capacity for time and some other problems. But for the amount that's at stake for people not to be practicing and, doing the preparation that's going to make them high performers, I was pretty surprised that doesn't exist more in sales.
Is that the gate though? Is it that people don't want to practice that much in terms of your sales reps, or is the gating factor the manager's time? Because when I, tell those early stories about you, AJ, part of what stands out is you spent a lot of time doing that. And I've been in a lot of SaaS businesses, and I had not seen somebody provide that level of coaching before. People were often lucky to get, some role play and coaching at SKO and when new products rolled out, and not much continuous. So is the gate that reps don't necessarily like to or want to practice, or is it that managers struggle to provide the time and resources?
I mean, I don't think it's the time. I think it's the laziness factor. And you have to truly, this isn't me blanketing all middle level management here, but I think that there's a craft. And if you think about the mindset of when you first get promoted or the management role, first off, it's tough because you are a manager, so you're probably a top seller. So you're missing the closing of deals. And we all know that a good individual seller doesn't always make a good coach. In fact, sometimes they're worlds apart. And you have to create multiple paths for both and understand and recognize who has more of a softer coaching ability versus who's like just wants to close deals. And I've worked with both at the manager level, who the manager just is on the phone closing all the deals for the team, and then the manager who doesn't. But I think there's a third breed here, which is like you were pretty good and you got promoted, you have a honeymoon factor, maybe your team's all remote. And like, it's harder to coach in a remote world, right? Like how do you replicate the walking back and forth in the conversations and being able to grab people? That's a really challenging problem. And I don't think companies have helped support it or figured out how to do that super well yet. And so that allows the manager to get complacent in a lot of ways. Is like one part of like, well, I missed the close of the deal. I'm not with my team anymore. And I took the manager role because I wanted it a little bit of an easier life. It's the player coach. Players a lot harder. The upside is usually higher to make more money the
Mhm.
coach is a little bit tend to be viewed as like not quote unquote as stressful, but the truth of the matter is it's actually, if done correctly, one of the more stressful roles in the organization, because you have a team responsibility and you're a manager not used to that. So I don't think it's somewhere in the middle, maybe. Russ, to answer your question more directly, but maybe what does Noah, what do you think of that?
So my part of my role here, self-proclaimed scientist, AJ. And so as you and I spar this out, my job is to support what you're saying with data. And so there was this study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they found that high sales performers, people that close twice as many deals, are 14% more likely to be promoted to manager, right? So we promote these great sellers to managers. Problem is that cohort of sellers that are the high performers, when they coach teams, those teams 7.5% lower performance. So we promote these great sellers to managers. They're more likely to get promoted if they're good sellers, but their teams perform worse than the average team because they're just not coaches, right? They're sellers. I mean, yeah, as you said, like they missed the close, they missed the like, it's not what they are as people. And so we have this fundamental problem we've created in sales, that we believe that great sellers will be great managers and coaches. And oftentimes we talk to companies every day, they're acknowledging and they're aware that maybe that's not the best path. And for now, one of the best things we can do is give them great training, give them coach the coach experience, so we can help them learn those behaviors that you seem to just naturally gravitate to in your sales leadership roles, but oftentimes organizations don't. And so it creates.
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't a great seller. I had like a quarter where I was the top seller, but by just happenstance, because I closed a really big deal when I was an individual seller. But I was the first to admit that I wasn't a great closer. In fact, at Trent Kite, Russ might remember this, I tried to shortcut deals. I would just like get the deal in and like didn't actually always, I was definitely known on one hand as discounting, on the other hand is like side deal Sally, who would like incentivize the reps to hit their quotas by like, and there was, Russ might remember this, there's one rep that we both lovingly know who really wanted a purse 1 month. And I was like, okay, Emily, if you sell $100,000, then we'll get you the purse. Every morning we would come in and I'd have coaching sessions with her, and we'd have our quota board and we talk about her comp. And this is actually like self-fulfilling, because this is a big part of why QuotaPath exists, because of how I was thinking about incentives for behavior. And every morning she would come in and guess what? She got that Chloe purse because she sold 150K as well. But at the end of the day, I knew that like that was something she had in her. I could help bring that out. I definitely didn't close any of those deals for her. I like, I remember that month very fondly, and she crushed it, and everyone else was ticked off at me for the purse, but whatever.
You do what works, and if it's a purse, then you do a purse, right? But it's very individual, because not everybody values that. So
I think what I love that AJ just said is the incentive was there, the motivation was there, but AJ coached her, right? She was willing to be coached, which
it was a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's probably ultimately what really is the challenge here, Russ, is that it's a shit ton of work. Sorry if that needs to get bleeped out, but like it is just a lot of work for a manager to have to spend a massive amount of time. Like how I was coached, this just taught me everything I needed to know about coaching. Is I showed up at first day at Meltwater, and I was put on a team with the top seller in the entire organization. She was the top seller, and she sold to companies I'd never heard of. Thermo Fisher was like a deal that she had just closed. I'm like, who the hell is Thermo Fisher? Is that like Fisher Price? What is that? No idea like what they did. Like beakers, I don't know. They make scientific things. And I like just tried to emulate her, and I completely failed. She wasn't coaching me. I was just listening and trying to like say like all of these words I didn't know. And then so I failed with her pretty quickly, moved on to another. I did well because I worked my ass off. And so to be coached, you just have to be a hard worker. I moved on to another sales leader, and she was selling to like public companies that just gone IPO, and they were doing like their Series D funding. I was like, what is Series D funding? I don't know. Is that like a race car? What is going on? I had no idea what anything the words on venture funding. This is 15 years ago. I'm like definitely have gone through a little bit different path and know these terms now, but I just didn't know any of these. So I was failed again. finally, I had a sales manager, Alicia, and she was like a teacher. She was just literally a teacher. She was like a kindergarten teacher, and she treated me like a kindergartner. And that was amazing. And she would just like, I would be on calls and she just would say the things that I needed to say in a very soft spoken term. And sometimes she'd play a game with it and make me say words that didn't make any sense. And I would say carbon footprint, and the person on the other side would be like, what are you talking about right now? That has nothing to do with conversation. And she'd be laughing, and we really enjoyed that. And that was fantastic. That was how I learned to coach. You have to spend the time with the person, and the person has to have that tie to you, and just do it very softly and clearly. And it just starts to stick and it starts to resonate. Took that, learned from that. And that's how I've just a lot of time though, like all your days to get that behavior to change over 6 months, a year. And eventually, if they put the work in it, they'll see the changes themselves and never want to leave you.
But I think your point, and the point on the purse story as well, is that was in you. You needed somebody to work to bring it out, and they had specific techniques.
Yeah, they had to be like focused on me, not focused on themselves.
Exactly so. Focus. And so building on that for a minute, if I can, one of the challenges that I've seen is knowing when reps are ready. And at Quantified, we work with people in pharma and other areas where deploying a rep that's not ready is really, really expensive and or can create a lot of legal liability. So curious to know from each of you, how do you know when somebody's ready to put on the floor? How do you know when this new rep, this green AJ that has just walked into the business, is ready to hit the phones?
Well, I'd love to say it was just the trial by fire, because first company I was on the phone the second day. I was literally making cold calls and having conversations on day 2. And that was in 2008, the way you did it. The world's obviously changed quite a bit. And as you said, Russ, things have gotten much more technical and sophisticated. And there's a lot of things you need to understand, not just about the industry, but on how applications work, on security, on compliance, on financial, on the competitive space, of course. There's so much of that to truly understand. And it can feel like it's a big upfront cost to have that level of training. I think the way I've always done it previously is we've had after a month, I can't even remember, it was like 6-week program. But after that 6 weeks, we had the entire sales management team in a room, and then that rep would do a demo and have that conversation, and we would just relentlessly push them. And I think 9 times out of 10, they failed that first conversation. In fact, there was one rep, Russ will bring up Haley, who ended up being the top seller at Trenkite,
Right.
But I think she failed like 4 times. And it was like a very infuriating situation. But we also knew from a coach, similar to probably what Noah went through on the swimming circuit, you kind of feel this out. You know when you can push someone, and you know when you can pull back. We had Kellen, who was a junior Wimbledon winner. So someone that like knew sports and knew how to be coached, and knew that if you're going to be tough on them, that was going to be a little bit of a challenge. But like the way I coached Kellen is that I knew he wasn't great with the details, and I knew he wasn't very focused on getting his calendar and schedule right. So what did I do? I made him responsible for the entire team's calendar and schedule. Every morning, he had to come in at 8 a.m. and write down every single person's demo. For 3 months, he did that, and he hated it. But like that's the type of discipline that you need to show when you're going through it. And so you do these type of things, and you just kind of recognize what people need, and you give them what they need.
Well, growth happens outside the comfort zone for the most part. So I love that story. And I also love the fact that you made the testing difficult, because the thing that I've often seen, and I think we've probably all seen it, is sort of the softball, where you go in and you present and the other AEs ask softball questions. And it's like, yeah, this is nothing like a real sales conversation. Noah, how about you? As you think about when somebody is ready to deploy in any role, whether sales or elsewhere, how do you evaluate, is this person ready to go on the floor? Are they ready to start?
Yeah, so we get the joy of doing this with a lot of customers, and what we have figured out over time, AJ and Russ, is 2 patterns, right? There's actually 2 levels to readiness. Level 1 is, are you customer ready? And level 2 is, are you quota capable? And so one of the things we really talk to our customers about is there's a difference between like, are you ready to be on the phone and can you can you talk about the product in a way that's sensical? But then there's also this next level of readiness that's very predictive of performance and what the sales leadership cares about, which is, are you quota capable? And so we actually think about two different thresholds. The nice thing with technology is we can replicate what AJ, what you just described that you went through or you led, is what every organization does, right? They typically have some, Friday pitch session where all the new folks pitch each other and they practice, and then they get up in front of management, and management, beats them up or fills out a rubric or decides whether or not they pass this gate. With technology, we can do two things. One, we can make that process of review, consistent, scalable. It doesn't have to take a bunch of people's time, and it can offer really good personal feedback. Second is we can allow the Haleys of the world to practice as many times as they want to be ready. And we can help them understand where they sit from a benchmark perspective on that journey so they can pass with a very high degree of certainty. We just did this big onboarding program for a pharmaceutical company that's selling a new drug. And we allowed the reps to practice in private before they went through the official sort of certification rubric. And so we see them practice a ton because it's safe. Like the AI is the only person looking at them. Then they get in front of, the AI certification, which, their manager also reviews, and they're ready. And the pass rate was 92%, right? So instead of the pain and torture of AJ, you got to go beat them up because, that's your job. Your job is to make them perform and teach them the discipline. The technology can be sort of a non-emotional evaluator, get them to a level of scientific readiness based upon sales processes that we see. And we can also do that at two levels of customer ready as well as quota capable.
Yeah, and I think, Noah, the point you're making is that balancing the science and the art is an important piece of this. There's enough, there's obviously for what you all do, like that level of technology and sophistication, I couldn't dream of that existing previously. And so we did use what was available at the time, the primitive call recording, call coaching, and like listening to the talk track and like picking up on keywords or objection handling. But for the real-time feedback to now be at this level is a total game changer for how we're thinking about the world, right? I think you balance that with still having the coaching and the soft skills of the human element to really where the science works. And if they're prepping and practicing, as we talked about, enough, then they're going to pass 92-93% of the time. Like that's exactly what we want to have happen, because otherwise we're being inefficient. And in today's world, no one wants to be inefficient.
No one can afford it. To build on that, curious from both of you, your perspectives on how technology is going to change sales going forward, because obviously, Noah, you're building things to change, improve sales coaching. AJ, I have to say that I'd never thought of sales compensation as difficult until the first time I had to put together a sales comp plan, and it nearly killed me. And then I was like, oh my gosh, and now I have to administer this thing. Yeah. So you're both plainly dedicated to using technology to improve, the life of sales, but whether it's the stuff you're working on at QuotaPath or Quantified or else ways, if you think about the next 10 years, how is sales going to evolve based on technology?
Oh, a loaded question there, Russ. I think you're right in that Noah and I probably are on the same side of this problem of like, we understand and realize the human capital and their human relationship that exists. And honestly, I would go one step further and say it's been an element that's been sorely missing in the last few years. And we see this like bubble up, and it feels, heard people walking on the street or whatever, just say like, it feels like everyone is just on edge or a little bit more tense. We're just not as nice. My mother is a flight attendant. She tells me every time I see her that the world has changed because of the types of passengers that she deals with today. And so like I look at it and I'm very positive around the growth of sales as organizations. It doesn't necessarily have to be people. I don't think that that's something that we're all sitting here and saying, but I think that we're saying like, how can we create a better sales experience, a better customer journey, a better feeling as you go through this. As it relates to sales comp, you have the financial goals and the financial targets of the company. There's typically a delta that gets cut where the financial plan and the quotas are, there's a big miss between those two, and incentives are not necessarily misaligned. But if the financial team like comes in, or the sales team comes in at 60% of their quota, and the company hits their target, the CEOs, and Rusty, you and I have been in rooms before where we're drinking champagne and the sales floor is not. And I hated that. I was so frustrated at that experience. So like there's a problem to be solved there for sure. I think as it relates to the future, to answer your question more directly, I'm very confident that our world of AI is going to help enhance and be not just a supplement, not just a co-pilot, but a driver to change that we all want to see and have. And I'm excited about some of the technologies, certainly on the quantified bucket. Like that's the type of technology that excites me to see come to the forefront and help these teams be more capable in having conversations.
Yes, building on what AJ said, I mean, there's a big tension here, right? I mean, we face this tension and we think a lot about this tension, but I think one of the things people think about with AI, and certainly generative AI, is, are we on a path where salespeople are going to be replaced? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the question we get asked a lot is, can you turn your technology? You have this great role play technology, Noah, that replicates what a customer would say. Can you also turn that technology to basically replicate what a salesperson would say and be a digital seller? I think you're right, AJ. I mean, there's still a humanity to this whole thing. And I think a lot of us still want to talk to a person, and we want that person to give us advice, and we want to build trust in a relationship with that person. I was talking to an investor yesterday who does a lot of space around call centers. And I was asking them, what do you think the actual curve is before we replace call centers with AI bots? And they said they talked to 20 different very large call centers, expecting that curve to be 3-5 years. They said the average prediction was 15 years.
Really?
Yeah, 15 years.
That's interesting. I think there's an innovator's dilemma piece that's a challenge to that, where they're going to be the ones. You ask Kodak when the digital camera is going to come around, and they say 15 years. You're like, okay. So
interestingly, these were investors and not yes. But I agree with you. And so I think we're in a world where we can decide, are we going to try to do replacement? Like, as I was preparing for this, I was listening to AJ's conversation with Mark Roberge on AJ's great podcast, and he was talking about, are we going to replace reps with AI? And, there's definitely some people that are in that camp, but I think the reality right now is, let's make people more productive using AI. AI can help. It can help us 30 to 50%. If you look at all the data, be more productive, be more efficient, be better versions of ourselves. Let's embrace that. Technology's helping us on that curve. It's not here to replace us yet. Maybe in 15 years.
Yeah, I fully agree with those sentiments. And I think in that podcast, that same vein, Mark Roberge, who's the guest, who's fairly well known. He wrote a book called Sales Acceleration Formula. He was a CRO of HubSpot. He is taking a little bit of a contrarian point of view because he's an investor and runs a fund now. And so he's looking to invest in disruptors. But at the same time, he himself, I think, is taking a point of view around I think there's something to be said if we kind of shoot for the stars type of deal and feel like we hit the moon, we come out on the other side in a great way. And I think what you're saying, Noah, in terms of how do we help the productivity aspect of it versus the replacement is the right way to look at the problem.
I love that. For the last question, I'm going to get a little bit tactical, but I want to build on something you both have said about coaching, essentially helping people be better versions of themselves, right? So I'm interested in, from each of you, and we've shared some great stories, up till now, but I'm curious to know, what's a real world example of a barrier you've helped a rep get past, you've helped someone get past in coaching, whether it's you directly doing the coaching or whether, Noah, perhaps it's working with a client on something. So helping people get past a barrier, and then what was the outcome, both professionally in terms of, what happened to their career, but also personally, how did this impact, do we know how this impacted the person?
Starting with me here, Russ.
Go for it, AJ. Go for it.
There was a sales rep back in 2008 that had a really challenging problem where he was an up talker. And he would end the ends of his sentences like this. So everything he said sounded like a question. And it's really hard to emulate, but it was the most annoying thing that I've ever heard. So this was a very personal piece of feedback that I had to give him. And it was a barrier to him closing deals. We were sparring one day, and this was where I kind of regret the sparring choices that we had. So we had these kitchen knives that we pretended like there was a competitor that we had back in the day, and we never knew where they're going to show up. But it was also part of the Glen Ross, I think the third place one set of steak knives. And so we had it, and we were he had a knife and he was cutting into a chair as I was giving him this feedback. I was like, on retrospect, that was probably not the right thing for him to be doing at that moment in time, but it was a real barrier for him to, I had to coach him through this. I had to get him through this because it was going to stop him from being successful. And it took a few sessions. It wasn't just done in that one session, but I definitely remember the first session when I gave it to him, and I was recording and I was playing it back and trying to get him to hear it himself. And eventually he did push through, and he became the most successful seller in the company. He ran the most successful office. He then became the area director. And then he became my arch nemesis because he was the executive director at Meltwater, a company that competed directly against the company that Russ and I were at, the one that I founded. And now he's a really good friend. And he runs the entire global CS team for Meltwater, of a $500 million revenue company. And that he was on a performance plan at that point in time when I was talking to him. And my boss and two other bosses wanted to fire him. And I pushed hard. I was defensive of him. I said, this guy is working his ass off. We're going to figure this out. And I know there's a few key things, and I'm not going to say him being an up talker just solved all of his things, but it was definitely the one moment in time where he flipped, and he's never looked back since.
Well, a piece I love about that story, in addition to the, hey, be careful when you coach somebody really well, you may be creating your nemesis, but leaving that outside of it for a moment, because that's actually kind of a cool piece of legacy.
He was just at my birthday party in Austin a few weeks ago. So we're good friends.
All good friends. But the fact that sometimes you need to coach people on things that may be uncomfortable. It is one thing to say, hey, it doesn't sound like you have your product knowledge where you want it to be, but it's a different thing to say the way you talk needs to change to become successful. So I love diving into, being willing to dive into that personal and vulnerable stuff. How about you, Noah, as you think of, when you think of quantified customers or people that you've coached, what's a story that has an outcome that you're proud of?
Yeah, I love the question and the example, AJ. It's a fun one of up talk. For me, I remember we had a very senior guy who was a seller on our team, and he was very professorial, right? So very, very smart, highly educated.
Hold on. Your whole quant degree and using words that I don't understand. Professorial, please define for me.
He had a lot of letters after his name, AJ. Those fancy letters that mean he had some degrees.
Okay, that makes sense. I can use context clues, I guess, on this. I got it.
He was educated. He was smart, and he knew that. And he had gotten to where he was in his career by, being eloquent and holding the floor on any call that he was on. And so we thought, he'd be a, sales team member, good seller, knew the product, knew the information. And what we discovered though was, a lot of times folks essentially don't know what good looks like, right? So as much as he was eloquent and was a good presenter, he would get on sales calls and he would talk the whole time, right? He just was excited to present, and it sounded good, and everyone would listen and their heads would nod, and he would get that nonverbal feedback that people were paying attention. But we failed to get past the stage of present, right? We never got into the buyer presenting any information back to us to create a sales process, or we never got to next step set because we went over on every call because he was presenting. And so we really had to, it was about listening and about, that back and forth exchange. The problem was because he had gotten to where he was off of building off of this strength, he wasn't that open to coaching, honestly. And so, we had to take a different approach. I tried to sit down with him and say, hey, you got to switch your format up and you should do discovery and really start thinking about listening at the beginning of the call, and the buyer should talk more than you. But none of it was breaking through. And so, we tried showing him talk to listen ratios, which you can get out of all the conversation intelligence platforms. Didn't break through as well. What we eventually did was we gathered videos of great sellers, and we showed him what good looks like in context, a few different examples of what does great look like, and then showed him his behavioral patterns against those. And so by doing that, we were able to really say, here's a data-driven perspective on how you're doing and how these folks are doing and why they're getting a different outcome than you are. And so we need to change the behavior here. And so let's create a simulation to do that, because we're going to watch this and let you cycle through it as many times as you would like before you have to try it live. So it can feel like it's your behavior, right? It can feel natural to you. And through the combination of basically, us noticing something, giving him a method of practicing and guiding him towards a pretty significant behavior change of something that he felt like was a personal strength, but was actually holding him back, we were able to help him unlock getting past the sales stage that he was just stuck at on every single one of his deals, and really able to unlock performance for him by showing him a different approach to take that turned out to be very successful for him.
Love that. It sounds like making it concrete, making it visible was a big piece of it.
Making it concrete, and also a lot of times, even the best coaches, it's just hard to break through with some people because they're so attached to the things that they believe in their identity. Mm-hmm. And so persuading them to think differently, there's great art to that, but there's also sometimes some people want to see data, they want to see proof, they want to see evidence. And if you can show up with that as well, you can typically break through in a different way.
Yeah, but both these stories actually deal with somebody having to confront something uncomfortable. The classic, what got you here won't get you there. Whether it is, I am sure that when you tell somebody that they uptalk, the first thing they say is, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I can't even do uptalk. I don't know, but I'm sure that they have to work through that. And similarly, this person had to work through what I'm doing got me to this point and won't get me any further. So yeah, useful. Well, we are about at time. There is one quick question, if you guys don't mind fielding it.
Of course.
And this is from somebody in learning and development. And she's saying, I've been charged with figuring out new tools with AI and other things coming in. If you guys had to give a recommendation of 5 tools that I should consider that are in the market right now, what are those 5 tools and why? And it's okay to say Quantified and QuotaPath.
QuotaPath.
All 5 start with
number 1 on that list, QuotaPath.
We're giving 3 tools because we're definitely talking about QuotaPath and Quantified in those examples. But I think it's really interesting. It's a great question, Russ. Here's what I would say to this. There are lots of companies, and Quantified is not one of them, lots of companies that are adding AI on as an afterthought, like that it's not their mainstay. And so this is a really challenging time to really have those type of evaluations, because I think those are just like hey, I can just put this on and answer some questions, but it's not really doing the thing that the main product needs it to do. You need to actually think about where AI can actually be helpful in just in the product. Comp plans are really complicated. We have a way to demystify those and make it very simple and easy to understand. It's a pretty clear connection to it. Now, Quantified in terms of coaching, allowing you to actually have those real conversations and get the real-time feedback. That's the mainstay of the products, right? So as you are doing those evaluation and those tools, I would just be careful and caution you on anything that has AI just attached to it automatically. But what I would say is that trust your team. And here's what I mean by that. There's this world of just doing the evaluation as the buyer, as the decision maker, but the whole world is opened up to where you do have the opportunity to try and actually access things to really truly understand them and truly understand what the ROI is going to be on those tools. It's more critical now than ever to do that. And so I will let Noah do the recommendations of the actual tools. I am just thinking of the critical, be thoughtful in your evaluation, because there's a zillion email marketing tools that are out there. And there's the really expensive ones on some side, and there's the newer players that are promising AI. So just know what you're getting yourself into.
Be skeptical, separate the smoke and noise from the actual stuff, and consider the purpose. Why are we doing this? It sounds like.
Yes. Thank
Cool.
you for summarizing. You were just my AI chatbot right now for us. I appreciated that.
Rust GPT is happy to summarize. Noah, how about you?
So hearing the question coming from a learning and development person, you know, I'll probably give a sales, learning and development answer. But the way that we think about any learning and development is we lean on a learning model. So, you know, when you study how do people learn things, they learn things in a 70-20-10 model of learning. 70% is experience, 20% is feedback and coaching, and 10% is content. And so for learning and development people, I always challenge them, because most likely they have covered that content part, right? They've got a learning library, whether it's internal or external, of learning materials and courses that they hope that people do. The gaps typically for learning organizations is they haven't thought enough about coaching and mentoring and feedback technologies. And they certainly are probably underinvested in experiential technologies. They hope that just happens on the job. And so where we typically guide people is to consider those buckets of behavior change and learning and human performance that you're probably underinvested in, which would be, you know, coaching and mentoring technologies. There's a lot of those out there, as well as experiential learning technologies that can help people get reps, get practice, get cycles, and you could actually see the change. So most L&D folks start with the content because that's the stuff that's been out forever. Those are the easiest things to buy. The part I would nudge you to look for is specific tools that help unlock feedback and coaching and mentoring, as well as experiential practice and actually feeling those behaviors so you can drive the behavior change outcome that you're trying to create. So I didn't give any specific names there. If the person wants to follow up, I'm happy to give some specific tools and shout outs. There's some platforms that we love that, you know, feel like would add on to Quantified, of course. But that's my 70-20-10 answer.
Great answer. Great answer. Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining us. AJ, it's been wonderful to connect with you again and talk again. It's been entirely too long. Noah, great seeing and hearing from you as well. And thank you both.
Thank you, Russ. Thanks, AJ.
Thanks, Noah.